The sun had not yet burned the morning mist off the high desert training ground. Rows of olive drab tents stood in strict formation, and the only sounds were the distant rumble of supply trucks and the metallic click of rifles being checked by armorers. This was Fort Huachuca, Arizona, a place where legends in the world of long-range shooting were either made or forgotten. Among the 200 soldiers assembled for the annual advanced sniper evaluation was a woman they barely noticed at first. Her name was Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez, a 42-year-old veteran with 23 years in the Army, 17 of them spent as a sniper. She was 5 feet 5 inches tall, wiry and tan, with calloused hands that had pulled triggers on 3 continents. Her brown hair was pulled back tight under her patrol cap, and her eyes carried the calm, flat stillness of someone who had learned to silence her own heartbeat in the middle of a firefight. The evaluation was the toughest in the military. A week-long gauntlet of physical endurance, stealth movement, range estimation, wind reading, and live-fire exercises. Only 12 soldiers would earn the expert sniper badge that year, and only one would be awarded the legendary 3,000 to 100-meter sniper badge, a distinction so rare that fewer than 50 soldiers in history had ever received it. The requirement was simple to state, but nearly impossible to achieve. Place a single round from a Barrett M80 to .50 caliber sniper rifle inside a 20-inch circle at a distance of 3,000 to 100 meters, or just under 2 miles. The bullet would take nearly 5 seconds to reach the target. And during that time, the Earth would rotate, the wind would shift, the mirage would dance, and the bullet would drop over 500 feet before climbing back into its trajectory. Most snipers never even attempted the shot. The general who oversaw the evaluation was Major General Douglas Hartwell, a 60-year-old officer who had commanded sniper units in Desert Storm and the early years of the war in Afghanistan. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a square jaw and silver hair clipped so short it looked painted on. He believed in tradition, in the old ways, and he had never hidden his skepticism about women serving in direct-action sniper roles. Not that he said it aloud in official settings, but everyone who served under him knew. He thought women lacked the upper body strength to carry the Barrett rifle and its ammunition load over rugged terrain, and he believed that the mental toll of close-quarters killing was better handled by men. His staff had learned to keep their mouths shut when he muttered about political correctness in the ranks. The morning of the 4th day, the general made his rounds through the firing line. The Barrett M82 rifles were laid out on mats, their massive barrels pointing downrange toward targets scattered across the desert floor. The snipers knelt, sat, or lay prone behind their weapons, making final adjustments to their scopes and checking their data books. General Hartwell walked slowly behind them, his boots crunching on the dry gravel. He paused here and there to offer a word of encouragement or a sharp critique. When he reached Elena Vasquez, he stopped. She was lying prone behind her Barrett, her body perfectly aligned with the rifle, her legs spread slightly for stability, her left hand cupping the stock while her right index finger rested on the trigger guard. She was not looking through the scope yet. Instead, her eyes were closed, and her lips moved silently as she recited something to herself. The general stood over her for a long moment, watching. Then his eyes drifted down to the name tape on her chest rig. Vasquez, he had seen that name before. She had placed 3rd in the previous year's evaluation, a respectable finish, but not exceptional. He remembered thinking she had probably reached her ceiling. He looked past her, toward the target line. The 3,200-meter target was a small white disc barely visible to the naked eye, just a speck on the hazy horizon. The heat waves rising from the desert floor made it shimmer and dance, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. He had seen the best marksmen in the Army miss the target by 20, 30, even 50 meters. He had seen grown men weep with frustration after walking their shots across the desert for hours without a single hit. He had personally never attempted the shot. He was a general now, but back when he was a young officer, he had tried it once and missed so badly that his spotter couldn't even find the impact crater. The general took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Then he turned and walked away, heading toward the observation post where he would watch the day's events from a shaded platform with binoculars and a cup of coffee. He had not said a single word to Elena Vasquez. He had not needed to. His silence said everything. He did not believe she could do it. He did not believe any woman could do it. Elena opened her eyes as the general's footsteps faded. She had felt his presence like a shadow passing over her, heavy and cold. She had felt his doubt pressing down on her shoulders, and she had felt the weight of every man who had ever told her she did not belong here. But she did not let those feelings settle. She had learned long ago to turn doubt into fuel. She reached for her data book, a worn leather notebook filled with handwritten calculations, wind readings, and range cards from 1,000 missions. She flipped to the page marked 3,200 meters, high desert, noon conditions. Then she began her ritual. First, she checked the rifle's zero. The Barrett M82 fired a .50 caliber bullet, weighing 650 grains, traveling at 2,800 feet per second. At 3,200 meters, the bullet would drop 532 feet, roughly the height of a 40-story building. To compensate, Elena had adjusted her scope's elevation turret to its maximum setting, plus she had added an additional 16 minutes of angle using the reticle's holdover marks. She checked the wind using the markers she had placed earlier, small flags that dotted the desert at 100-meter intervals. The wind was blowing from 3 o'clock at 12 miles per hour, gusting to 18. That meant the bullet would drift nearly 30 feet to the left, a correction that required her to aim at a point well to the right of the target, a point where nothing existed but empty sky. She checked the temperature, 94 degrees Fahrenheit, which reduced air density and decreased drag, but not enough to matter at this range. She checked the barometric pressure, 29.9 inches and falling, which meant a weather front was moving in, which meant the wind would become more erratic. She checked the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself, which would push the bullet an additional 12 inches to the right over the 5 seconds of flight. She accounted for all of it, and then she closed her eyes again. The range safety officer's voice crackled over the radio. Firing line is clear. Shooters, you have 60 minutes to engage your primary targets. Begin when ready. Around Elena, the other snipers began to fire. The crack of the Barrett rifles was thunderous, a deep, concussive boom that shook the ground and sent dust spiraling into the air. The spotters beside each shooter called out corrections. Left 2 mils, up 1, wind changed. At a half mil right, cold bore shot was low. Adjust elevation, the desert filled with the rhythm of war. A percussion of controlled explosions and shouted data. Elena did not fire. She lay still, her breathing slow and even, her heart rate down to 40 beats per minute. She had learned this skill in the mountains of Afghanistan, where a single deep breath could reveal a sniper's position. She had learned to become stone, to become earth, to become nothing at all. She was waiting for something that only she could feel. A moment of perfect stillness between her own heartbeats when the world seemed to pause. 5 minutes passed, 10, 15. The general, watching through his binoculars, saw her lying motionless and frowned. He assumed she was frozen, overwhelmed by the pressure. He had seen it happen before. Some shooters simply choked. He made a mental note to recommend her for retraining. 20 minutes passed. Elena's spotter, a young sergeant named Marcus Webb, sat beside her with his own spotting scope. He did not speak. He had worked with Elena for 3 years, and he knew better than to break her concentration. He had seen her hit targets at impossible distances, had seen her thread bullets through windows the size of dinner plates, had seen her put a round through the scope of an enemy sniper who was aiming at her own head. He trusted her completely. At 22 minutes, Elena's eyes snapped open. She settled her cheek against the stock, pressed her eye to the scope, and began the most delicate dance of her life. She breathed in, let half out, held the rest. The reticle steadied. She adjusted her aim 3 inches right of the target to feet above it, and another for feet right to account for the spin drift of the bullet. The crosshairs hovered over a patch of empty sky. Any civilian watching would have thought she was aiming at nothing. Her finger touched the trigger. She felt the first stage, the slack, the take-up. Then she paused. The wind gusted to 18 miles per hour. She waited. The wind dropped to 11. She added a feather of pressure. Her heart beat. She waited for the pause between beats. Her finger moved 1 millimeter. The trigger broke like a glass rod. The Barrett roared. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, a blow that would have bruised a lesser shooter, but she had been absorbing it for 17 years. She did not flinch. She did not blink. She stayed in the scope, watching the bullet's vapor trail streak across the desert. The tracer element in the round left a bright orange line that hung in the air like a faded marker. She watched it climb, curve, and begin its long descent. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The bullet seemed to slow down, to float, to hang in the heat haze. She saw it drop toward the white disc, saw it intersect the plane of the target, and then she saw nothing. The dust kicked up by the impact was too small to see at this distance. Her spotter, Marcus, had his eye pressed to the spotting scope. He did not speak. He was waiting for the splash, the small puff of dust that would confirm a hit or a miss. The general, watching from the observation post, saw the round strike the desert floor approximately 60 meters left and 30 meters short of the target. He lowered his binoculars and shook his head. A miss. A bad miss, but Marcus saw something different. Through his spotting scope, magnified 40 times, he saw the dust cloud from the miss. Then he saw a second impact, smaller and higher. The bullet had ricocheted off a rock and struck a second rock, sending fragments spinning. And then he saw the target disc move. It shifted slightly, tilted, and then fell over. He blinked, wiped his eye, and looked again. The disc was on the ground. The bullet had not struck the disc directly, but a fragment of the bullet, a sliver of copper and lead no bigger than a fingernail, had traveled another 40 meters after the ricochet and punched through the bottom edge of the target. Marcus lowered his spotting scope and looked at Elena. She was already packing up her rifle, sliding it into its carrying case. She did not ask if she had hit. She did not look at him for confirmation. She simply began to clean her equipment, her hands moving with the efficient economy of a woman who had done this 10,000 times. The general walked down from the observation post. His face was unreadable. He approached Elena and Marcus, his boots leaving deep impressions in the soft sand. Marcus stood up and saluted. Elena, still on the ground, did not. She was not being disrespectful. She was simply not finished with her rifle. General Hartwell looked at the target disc, which a range officer had retrieved and now held in his hands. The hole was tiny, ragged, and clearly made by a fragment, not a clean impact. The general examined it for a long time. Then he looked at Elena. "That's not a clean hit," he said. His voice was flat. Elena looked up at him. She did not smile. She did not frown. Her face was the same calm mask she wore behind the rifle. "The requirement says place a round within a 20-inch circle," she said. "It doesn't say the round has to be intact. It doesn't say it has to be the first impact. A fragment is still part of the round. A hit is a hit." The general's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. The regulation was written that way intentionally, to account for the unpredictable nature of long-range ballistics. A sniper could not control what happened after the bullet left the barrel. The only thing that mattered was the result. Marcus spoke up. "General, I observed the impact. The fragment struck the target at 3,200 meters. That's a legal hit by every standard in the book." The general stared at both of them. The sun was higher now, and the heat was oppressive. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He had spent his entire career believing certain things about soldiers, about men and women, about who belonged in the line of fire. And now a 42-year-old woman with gray streaks in her hair and calloused hands had done something he could not do. Something most snipers would never even attempt. He handed the target disc back to the range officer without a word. Then he turned and walked away. The other snipers had stopped firing to watch. The desert was quiet except for the wind. That evening, the desert took on the colors of a bruise, purple and deep orange bleeding into the dark blue of the coming night. The soldiers gathered in the mess tent for the award ceremony, a tradition that marked the end of the evaluation. The tent was lit by harsh fluorescent lamps that cast a sickly glow on the rows of folding chairs and the makeshift stage at the front. 200 snipers sat in exhausted silence, their shoulders sore from recoil, their eyes red from staring through scopes for hours. The smell of sweat, gun oil, and burnt powder hung in the air like a ghost. Elena Vasquez sat in the third row, her arms crossed over her chest. She had cleaned her rifle 3 times, had packed her gear, had written her after-action report. Now she sat waiting for a moment she had dreamed about for years, but never allowed herself to believe would come. Beside her, Marcus Webb fidgeted with his patrol cap, turning it over and over in his hands. He was nervous for her, more nervous than she was. Major General Douglas Hartwell stood behind a podium at the front of the tent. His dress uniform was crisp, his medals polished, his jaw set in a line that was almost a scowl. He had spent the afternoon in his office, reviewing the rules, checking the video footage from the range cameras, consulting with the senior marksmanship instructor. He had looked for a reason to disqualify the hit. He had found none. The fragment had traveled 3,000 to 100 meters from the muzzle. It had struck inside the 20-inch circle. By every regulation, every standard, every precedent, it was a legal hit. The general cleared his throat, and the tent fell silent. He began by thanking the range staff, the safety officers, the armorers, and the medical team. He talked about the importance of sniper skills in modern warfare. He talked about courage and discipline and sacrifice. His voice was steady, professional, and utterly hollow. Everyone in the tent could feel that his heart was not in these words. Then he called the names of the 12 soldiers who had earned the expert sniper badge, one by one. They walked to the stage, saluted, and received their badges. The applause was polite but tired. The soldiers wanted to go to bed. They wanted to stop thinking about wind and elevation and bullet drop for a few hours. The general paused. He looked down at the small, wooden box on the podium. A box that held the 3,000 to 100-meter sniper badge. A silver eagle clutching crossed rifles over a banner that read ultra-long range. He had given this badge only 3 times in his career. And each time to a man. Each time to a soldier who had performed a feat of marksmanship that bordered on the miraculous. He did not want to give it tonight. Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez, the general said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the microphones carried it to every corner of the tent. Elena stood up. She smoothed the front of her uniform and walked to the stage. Her boots made soft thumping sounds on the wooden steps. She stopped 3 feet from the general, came to attention, and saluted. He returned the salute stiffly, as if his arm were made of wood. The general opened the wooden box and removed the badge. It was heavier than it looked, solid silver with gold trim. He pinned it to Elena's left chest, just above her rows of campaign ribbons. His fingers fumbled with the clasp, something that had never happened to him before. When the badge was finally secure, he took a step back and looked at her. He saw a woman who had joined the army at 19 because she needed money for college. He saw a woman who had been told she was too short for infantry, too quiet for special operations, too gentle for combat. He saw a woman who had been hazed by male soldiers, who left her gear on the roof of the barracks, who hid her ammunition during night exercises, who whispered insults when they thought she could not hear. He saw a woman who had volunteered for sniper school when the instructor laughed in her face and said women did not belong there. He saw a woman who had graduated at the top of her class, who had served 17 deployments. Who had saved the lives of countless soldiers by eliminating threats from distances so far away that the enemy never heard the shot that killed them. He saw all of this in the space of a heartbeat. And something inside him shifted. Not all the way, not completely, but just enough. He realized that his doubts had never been about her. They had been about himself, about his own limitations, about his fear of a world that no longer fit neatly into the categories he had built in his youth. The general extended his hand. Elena shook it. His grip was strong, but hers was stronger. "Congratulations, Master Sergeant," he said. "That was the most unorthodox hit I have ever seen." Elena smiled for the first time. It was a small smile, barely a curve of her lips, but it reached her eyes and softened her entire face. "Thank you, General," she said. A hit is a hit. The tent erupted in applause. Not the polite, tired applause from before, but a genuine roar of recognition from 200 snipers who understood exactly what she had done. They cheered and whistled and stamped their boots on the floor until the tent shook. Marcus Webb was on his feet, clapping so hard his palms turned red. Other soldiers who had never spoken to Elena before now leaned over to pat her back, to shake her hand, to offer words of admiration that came from a place of deep respect. The general stepped back from the podium and allowed Elena to stand alone in the center of the stage. She looked out at the sea of faces, men and women both, young and old, all of them united by the singular skill of placing a bullet exactly where they wanted it to go. She thought about her father, a Mexican immigrant who had worked 2 jobs to put food on the table and who had told her never to let anyone tell her she could not do something.